Omicron ripping through the United States now as the White House starts to show its frustration with the unvaxxed. From build back better to build back later to build back never, it's looking like. Joe Manchin torpedoes President Biden's signature legislation, at least for now. And Spider-Man swings in with a lifeline for the box office. Monday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning, everybody. This is Cheddar's Need to Know podcast for December 20th. And what a weekend it was. I'm Carlo Versano, coming at you with Baker Machado. Baker, I don't even know where are you right now?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question. Good morning to you, Carlo. Good Monday morning to our audience as well. If you are watching us on the YouTube this morning, as you see, I am not at Cheddar Studios today. You can see this lovely tree behind me. I am at my house upstate in New York. We had ourselves quite the interesting sort of weekend. Usually, so I come up to see my husband, usually upstate over the weekends, and he wasn't feeling too good on Friday. So we go to get a COVID test on Saturday, and he tested positive for COVID for the Omicron variant. And even though I am negative, thank you, Moderna booster shot here, I am basically now quarantining for the next 2 weeks. So it is a COVID Christmas over here at this house.
Oh, good Lord. Well, hopefully Jared is,
Yes.
How's he feeling? Is he okay?
He's feeling great. I'm sure probably the only symptoms he's feeling is annoyance because he's having to hang out with me while I'm shouting downstairs in our living room. But other than that, he's completely healthy. How are you doing? I mean, Omicron has been spreading all over the place, Carlo. It's insane.
Dude, they're dropping like flies over here. I've got at least one family member positive. Christmas is just hanging by a thread. My whole goal this week is to just make it to Christmas without, my infant daughter getting exposed to COVID.
Oh,
That's all I want. I don't care about anything else. But it's ugly out there, Baker.
It's so crazy because when we did this pod on Friday, we had basically been joking in a serious way, but we were joking saying, everybody knows at least one person that is tested positive. I had no idea it would infiltrate this close to us. But look, as everything that has been in the last 2 years, I guess we'll just continue just to keep trucking along with all of this.
That's all we can do, man. Keep on trucking.
All right, well, so let's dive into some of the headlines and let's speak about Omicron, because with it coming fast and furious, now that the variant's sweeping through all parts of the country now, Moderna says their booster shot of their COVID vaccine significantly increases the level of antibody protection against the Omicron variant. Pfizer recently said a booster of its vaccine does the exact same. Dr. Fauci said Americans should brace for some tough few weeks to months to come. That as Omicron becomes the dominant strain in the U.S., while the White House issued an unusually harsh statement warning that the unvaccinated are, quote, looking at a winter of severe illness and death for yourselves, your families, and the hospitals that you might soon overwhelm. Now, President Biden is expected to deliver some version of that message when he addresses the nation tomorrow night, Carlo. But we should note the new positive cases continue on this huge trek up. We're up 21% over the last 2 weeks. We are now averaging 133,000 cases on average now.
Yeah, the White House putting that statement out after Kamala Harris once again screwed the pooch, tripped all over herself in the messaging department this weekend, saying that they didn't see Omicron coming, which, of course, yes, we did. We all saw it coming. I mean, the correct thing to say there was, no, we see these things. That's why you have to get vaccinated, right? You get the more vaccinations there are, the less chance there are for this stupid virus to continue to mutate. It's incredible to me how bad at general politics she is, truly. But not to get hung up on that, I think it's back to the virus. It's quite evident, I think, at this point that this mutation is escaping both natural and vaccine immunity, and it is much more transmissible. I mean, case in point, look at you, right? I mean, you guys were both fully vaxxed and boosted, and your husband still got a case of this thing. The good news is this variant is very clearly much milder than anything that we've seen. I mean, I shouldn't say very clearly. We don't really know yet, but it sure seems that way.
But just
I know half a dozen people.
South African data, that's what we're getting, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And everybody I know that has gotten this thing, they say it's a head cold and it goes away in a couple days. But, given how transmissible it is and how many people are still unvaccinated, I think to Fauci's point, it still is probably going to get ugly out there in the next few weeks. The failure, though, it's what we talked about last week, right? It's the testing. COVID would not be the life-altering thing that it is right now if we just had plentiful access to these antigen rapid tests, right? In a perfect world, we've got stacks of these things in our house, and we're just taking one before we go out to dinner, before we go to the movies. And hey, if you test positive, you stay home for a couple days. It's not the end of the world. And I'm really starting to think that, what Jen Psaki said a couple weeks ago when she kind of scoffed at the idea of sending those tests out, I think that that's going to become the heck of a job brownie of the Biden administration.
Oh,
You remember that?
wow.
Remember
Yes.
Bush?
Oh, yes. During FEMA,
right after
yep.
right after Katrina, saying, "Oh, you're doing a heck of a job, Brownie," as as that hurricane was destroying that. But I say that because that was really the point. I think that was the point of no return for the Bush administration, was Katrina. People saw how they responded to Hurricane Katrina, and they said these people are incompetent. They can't do anything right. And he never recovered after that. And I'm starting to think that this is what's happening to the Biden administration now. By the way, we talked on Friday about how those COVID tests are actually reimbursable through your insurance. They're actually not yet. That doesn't even go into effect until next month. Yeah. So even if you wanted to spend time with your insurance company on the phone trying to get your money back, you can't even actually do it. Here in Brooklyn, meanwhile, the urgent cares are so full, they're turning people away now. People online at the City MD facility down the street from my house, they're being handed blankets since it's back to being freezing cold outside. So you've got these scenes of people, huddled in blankets outside on the street. These pharmacies all have signs on their doors saying that they're out of tests. It's like it looks like some version of like the Great Depression or March 2020 out there, but it isn't. Of course, it isn't. Right? We're not in the same place, so I shouldn't even probably say that. But it's just what's so upsetting, Baker, and what's just so depressing about it is we're the country that built 100 years ago. We built the Hoover Dam, and then we went on to beat the Nazis, and we can't even get the freaking testing right of this thing after 2 years.
Right.
We are just a nation in serious decline. There's nothing else to say.
So the testing situation is interesting because it does harken back to the early days of the pandemic where testing was a lot more difficult because, one, they didn't have the testing really to sort of test what COVID was because it was so new.
Right.
Obviously, the testing has evolved over the last year and a half, 2 years or so, that it should be much more readily available. The problem we're seeing with Omicron is it's spreading so fast. So many people are getting infected, and the amount of tests that we have out there are not enough out there for the amount of people that need to get them, that this is going to be an issue where there's going to be so many people that are not been tested that are out there not knowing what their status is, which allows this thing to continue to spread and go all over the place. And again, if we're seeing massive spread in a place like New York City, which is close to 90% vaccinated, imagine what it does when it spreads to other parts of the country that have less than 60% vaccination. What happens in the South? What happens in Florida? What happens to all these other places? That, I think, and when you can't test to figure out who's got it and who doesn't, I think that's going to be a huge issue down the road.
Well, absolutely. It's all the more reason. I don't know why Biden doesn't just come out and say, look, we're going to authorize the Defense Production Act. We're going to, have the military take over. We're going to get these tests out the door. Do something. The testing is really the key here, I think.
All right, so let's talk about some other stuff that's on Joe Biden's plate because he's got a lot to really deal with, and that's because his entire domestic agenda. Oh man, that's an understatement. His entire domestic agenda now looks like it's dead in the water. That's because Senator Joe Manchin, who we've talked about ad nauseum for the last year or so, said over the weekend that he cannot now support the Build Back Better bill in its current form. Manchin shocked the White House when he went on Fox News on Sunday and said it is a hard no on the $2 trillion bill, completely dooming it in its current form. The Build Back Better legislation provided $500 billion for tax breaks on spending on climate change, as well as billions more to expand the social safety net by creating free preschool and expanded child care aid. Politico reported yesterday what I thought to be the most interesting thing was he had not given, apparently, the White House a heads up that he was going on Fox News to announce this. Fox News, by the way, didn't even know the bomb that he was about to drop on Brett Baer when it happened. And then when the White House got word about what he was doing, they apparently tried to call his aides, and the aides immediately directed the White House to voicemail. They didn't even answer the call from the White House, just going. And that's why you saw that sort of scathing statement come out from Jen Psaki yesterday, really going after Joe Manchin. But look, this was the whole reason why progressives like AOC and Pramila Jayapal, and Bernie Sanders, they were right. It seems like from the get-go, they knew if they allowed that bipartisan infrastructure bill to get passed without the Build Back Better bill in tandem, they knew it wasn't going to get passed. They kept telling us that Joe Manchin wasn't going to support it, and Joe Manchin kept saying, basically the opposite, saying, I'll listen, all of this, and it turns out the progressives were right here at the end of the day, Carlo.
I guess, I mean, that's sort of the Monday morning quarterback question, right? Would infrastructure have still gotten passed if the progressives held this bill? I don't know the answer to that. My guess is that they still would have managed to. I don't know. I really don't know, actually. But I can't say I'm surprised by Manchin, though. I mean, I think that the signs were pointing towards him sort of torpedoing this. But I mean, still, just it's an embarrassment for the Biden administration. I mean, their biggest priority gets tanked by a member of their own party who then sends them to voicemail while he delivers the news on Fox. I mean, can you even imagine that happening in the GOP? Can you even
never
fathom that? It doesn't happen. They don't let that happen because they
actually. Could you imagine Mitt Romney going on MSNBC and doing that to Trump's tax bill? Like, of course not. That would never happen.
McConnell would have taken him behind the Capitol building and killed him, probably, right? I mean, that just doesn't happen in Republican politics. They fall in line. Democrats don't. I wonder. The question now, I think, is this thing actually dead? Because the way that Manchin talked about it, he left open the idea, I think, of can they negotiate some parts of this bill as sort of like a la carte issues, some of the climate stuff, perhaps the child care, preschool. I don't know. The fact that Psaki came out and the White House came out and basically nailed him on this, I think suggests that they don't think that he's negotiating. They think it's over. We'll see, I guess. But just again, it's not shocking that this happened, but how it went down. I mean, God, if you're the White House right now, you're just like, you can't get any more bad news.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on, Carlo. We got some other big stuff we got to follow this morning. Not sure if you saw quite the expose the New York Times had in terms of an investigation over the weekend, focusing on the casualties of the U.S. drone war in the Middle East. The New York Times found that civilian deaths were far more widespread than previously known, and that was across multiple administrations, the Obama and the Trump administration. The paper got its hand on a secret Pentagon archive that describes many drone strikes as relying on deeply flawed intelligence that led to thousands of civilian deaths, including many children in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And this started in the late days of the Bush administration, ratcheting up during the Obama years and then exploding during the Trump presidency. I think the thing that stood out to me the most in this investigation, and I guess it's not really a surprise, was just how much the death count was severely undercounted based off of these civilian deaths.
Yeah, I recommend reading this piece that was on A1 of the Sunday Times yesterday. The New York Times drives me crazy sometimes, but they are one of the only newspapers out there that still has the resources to do an investigation like this.
Investigative journalism.
Yeah, and they did it with the Pentagon pushing back on them for months. The Biden administration, by the way, been knocking them on a lot of things today and lately. They have significantly pared back the U.S. air war, the drone war, since taking office. By one account, there were 1,600 American airstrikes in Iraq and Syria during the first 11 months of the Trump presidency and just 4 in the first 11 months of the Biden presidency. I feel like nobody knows this, and it's really strange to me because the White House has not been messaging on this. They haven't been talking about it. It's almost like they don't want people to know. And I think that a lot of Americans would be pleased to know that, the drone war has sort of dialed back in a lot of places. I mean, President Biden, say what you will about him on a lot of things, but he took a 20-point hit to his approval rating to get out of Afghanistan. He's more or less ended the drone war in the Middle East. I don't know. It's like it's not breaking through. I guess that's always the case, right? Foreign policy just doesn't break through, especially when there's so many things happening domestically. So I still find it notable, though.
Yeah, and the New York Times, by the way, saying that they have a follow-up in this part 2 of this investigation that is going to be coming in the coming days. So we'll no doubt keep you guys apprised on that during the week. Meanwhile, let's talk about the box office because we knew Spider-Man was going to do really well this weekend, Carlo. We just didn't think it was going to break every COVID-era box office record possible. Spider-Man No Way Home opened not just to $100 million, which was what people were expecting here. How about this? $253 million over the weekend, and that is the biggest debut of the pandemic by far, and it's the biggest ever for a Spider-Man flick. And it also, by the way, pandemic aside, the third biggest domestic opening of all time, behind just those two Avenger movies. And the records fell in spite of the new virus wave we're seeing, giving Hollywood some much needed evidence that people are jonesing to get back into the theaters here. I mean, globally, I thought was interesting here, over $500 million, a lot of that coming from Europe, which is also getting hit incredibly hard right now by the Omicron variant. And I wonder how much of this is tied to not just the Spider-Man fandom that is out there, which is huge, the Marvel fandom, but two, they did a really good job of promoting and not talking about spoilers, but letting you know that there were spoilers in this movie if you didn't go and see this. So to avoid going to get the spoilers, you needed to see this, which I think really put a lot of butts in the seats.
It's interesting, right? Because I mean, you said like it's some much needed evidence that people are trying to go back to the theaters, and they want to go back to the theaters for these big franchise blockbusters. If you look deeper at the box office numbers this weekend, this film Nightmare Alley, which was
terrible.
Guillermo del Toro, Oscar-winning, big-name director. Bradley Cooper as the star.
Cate Blanchett's
A-lister,
in it.
if ever there. Yeah, Cate Blanchett. A-list names. $3 million it made. The studio that made that movie must be really bummed out. Oh, wait. It's Disney, actually. So it doesn't actually matter.
Disney Searchlight. And this is what's so interesting, Carlo. Adult dramas, I mean, Gucci did okay in terms of COVID standards for an adult drama, but every adult drama is bombing at the box office, which is why a lot of box office analysts out there are speculating. Do you see, these big studios put adult dramas now on streamers? Is that the thing that we've learned during the pandemic, that adult dramas play well on streamers, but not in theaters? And the only films that people are going to see are these high, big budget superhero films.
Yeah. I mean, I think that again, it's like, older people are the ones who go see, the movies like House of Gucci, French Dispatch, those sorts of
West Side
adult
Story
dramas.
Was down almost 70% this weekend.
Yeah, and I think COVID is still keeping those people out of the theaters. Hopefully that'll change, because I can't live in a world where these are the only, Spider-Man and Avengers are the only movies that come to theaters, right?
Same. I don't know, by the way, I was watching this weekend. This also was the first time I've ever seen AMC do a commercial. It has Nicole Kidman in it. Have you seen it, by the way?
I've seen that commercial. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever seen it, where basically they're telling people, don't watch movies on your streaming device. Movies are made to be watched in a theater. I hadn't seen that ad until this weekend, which I thought was interesting. Speaking of the pandemic, let's talk about it in the sports world, because games are getting canceled left and right across professional sports. That as COVID rips through the leagues once again, filling up teams' reserve lists, even though virtually every player testing positive for the virus is either asymptomatic or mildly sick here. The NFL amending their strict testing policy and will no longer require asymptomatic vaccinated players to test weekly. The league also allowing high-risk players to opt out of the rest of the season as well. The NHL suspending games that involve cross-border travel until after Christmas. And there are concerns that the Hockey League won't be able to send any players to Beijing for the Olympics. Last week, Canadian hockey teams were basically having less than 50% of their stands full. We're getting back into that phase of the sports world all over again. We're going to see less and less people in the stands. And on the topic of the Beijing Olympics, we remember how much COVID played a role in the Tokyo Games just recently. Yeah. What are the Beijing Games going to look like in the next couple of months? I'm totally curious about that.
It may be that the NHL doesn't send any players, which would obviously be terrible for a Winter Olympics. Hockey's like the one thing that we have, hockey, right? Yeah. And meanwhile, in the NBA, 5 games have been postponed amid a wave of players in the COVID protocol. I think basically every player on the Brooklyn Nets almost has COVID.
Yeah,
I was supposed to go to the Nets game on Saturday, and we blew it off just because, even though I keep saying how I don't care about COVID anymore, I'm still trying to not get it before Christmas. And I'm glad that we did, because, again, first of all, everybody was on the protocol, including Kevin Durant. So it was basically like watching like a high school basketball game. At one point, the Nets were actually going to bring back Kyrie Irving, who's their unvaccinated holdout. And then he immediately tested into the COVID protocol. So it's like a joke, right? But I do think in all seriousness that the leagues really they got to start changing the way that they're thinking about this. These are like the healthiest people on the face of the earth, right? I don't think that at this point, basketball, football, hockey players should be benched and have to continue to test out if they're not legitimately sick. Right. In the same way that, Michael Jordan famously played with the flu. If you've got a little bit of a head cold and you want to be able to play.
I know, I agree with you, but what do you do about the spread? That's obviously, I think they're more concerned about the spread
Yeah,
rather than like how healthy they feel on this, because I feel like that's probably why they're in COVID protocols. Because I agree with you in the sense that like these athletes are the healthiest people on the planet. They take better care of their bodies
right.
than any of us would do with our whole lives. But I'm curious, it's because I'm sure they don't want more of their players than getting sick as a result, which is why they're all entering into these protocols.
Well, this is back to what I was saying last week. We can't stop this thing from spreading. We have learned this by now,
Right.
right? Like it's
True.
it's it's spreading. It's spreading even with all of these restrictions in place, even with these vaccinations. We've got to just, I think, throw our hands up and be like, this thing is going to rip through the population here. And if you are vaccinated and boosted, it's not going to be that big of a deal for you. Anyway,
Well, this is why
I've
we
been
talk
saying,
about this all
yeah,
the time about risk management. This is the next phase we're
yes,
in. The
exactly,
likelihood of us all getting COVID is incredibly high at
right,
least some point in our life, and now it's just the risk management phase. Yeah, Carlo,
exactly.
let's go into more to know right now. Stock futures pointing sharply lower this morning. That ahead of the shortened trading week. That as investors digest the rapid spread of Omicron and the news that the Build Back Better bill in Washington appears dead in the water. Goldman Sachs even lowered their growth forecast for next year, citing the difficulties in getting that spending bill passed.
There's much more to talk about on Manchin, I think, because
Oh, yeah.
God, it's really, it's almost remarkable because he negotiated that whole bill. He negotiated with the Democrats exactly what he wanted, and then he tossed it back. It's amazing. Anyway, overseas now, Chile has elected the leftist Gabriel Boric to be its next president. That makes him the 35-year-old former student activist. He will become the youngest ever leader of that Latin American country. He ran on a platform of reducing inequality, raising taxes on the rich, and addressing climate change. He beat his far-right competitor by 12 points, much larger than the polls anticipated. Chile, of course, in the process of drafting their first post-Pinochet constitution. He will have a big role in that. But remarkable to see that happening in Latin America right now.
Liberals in around the world doing really well in a lot of elections. There was an election just in the UK for a huge seat that the Tories, the Conservatives, had for decades, and the Liberals won that, going to Parliament, just showing the struggles that we're seeing Boris Johnson having in the UK. Meanwhile, all the people reported missing in last week's tornado outbreak in Kentucky have now been accounted for. That, according to the governor, Andy Bashir. The death toll from that outbreak now stands at 76 in Kentucky and 91 in total. One incredible story of survival, Carlo, that is coming out. Two little babies were put in a bathtub under a blanket as those twisters were coming. They were swept away, but were found more or less unharmed, but still in that bathtub. Wow, what a remarkable story.
That is a crazy story. Check that out in the local papers in Kentucky this morning. Truly unbelievable. Meanwhile, going back overseas, I should say, at least 200 people dead after a super typhoon hit the Philippines. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced. This typhoon Ray, they're calling it Odette for some reason locally, but Typhoon Ray hit the country on Thursday. Basically, is the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane, making it the strongest storm of the year.
Elon Musk, Times Person of the Year, claims he's going to pay more than $11 billion in taxes this year, Carlo. Musk, who was worth about $250 billion and is the richest man in the world by far, has been sparring on Twitter with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who called him a freeloader. He responded back calling her Senator Karen. Okay.
The thing I don't understand about Musk is, like, why would you spend any time on Twitter at all if you were that rich?
He's on it all of the time.
There's so much better use. Like, time is the one thing that you don't have. No matter how rich you are, there's only so much time in life. I don't understand it. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren, by the way, also testing positive for COVID, and she is boosted. So you're Cory Booker too. And finally, the jury in the Elizabeth Holmes trial starts its first full day of deliberations today. They're responsible for assessing these 11 charges of conspiracy and fraud against the former Theranos founder. I do not expect we're going to get a verdict maybe by the end of the week, but I don't think it's going to be really soon because this trial has been going on forever and it's rather complicated. But we will keep you posted, of course.
And one thing I'll just note on that one, again, 12 jurors, 8 men, 4 women. She only has to convince one of those 12 jurors to go on her side on this, and she wins this case. So the likelihood that she basically prevails here is incredibly high, Carlo.
Interesting. I think that I think she is going to walk, actually. I'm not sure. Okay. Anyway, sorry to be a little haggard this morning, guys. We're doing this remote.
That's what you do.
Yeah, and we're just trying to get through it. Okay. So we'll not get through this. I mean, get through sort of life. Anyway, that's what you need to know for Monday, December 20th. And God willing, we'll see you back here tomorrow, guys. Stay safe.
Amen.